Yo, if your neighbor has already called the cops on your Christmas lights, left a 4-page essay about your tacky reindeer, or reported your rooftop Santa to the freaking airport for runway confusion, then buckle up because today we're exposing the 56 most absurd Christmas neighbor complaints ever that are so insane you'll be screaming, "That's my street," in the comments. Smash the like button. Right now, if you've ever wanted to launch an inflatable Grinch into orbit, drop your wildest neighbor horror story below, because the craziest one gets pinned and shouted out tomorrow. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so we can keep roasting these holiday Karens together every single day this month. Let's go. 1. A woman stormed across her snowy yard and started shouting at the man next door because his Christmas lights were blinking too confidently for her street. She said the brightness made her car look dusty, and she demanded he shut the whole display down. The man tried to explain that they were store-bought lights and nothing extreme. She refused to listen and pointed at every bulb like she was inspecting evidence. A teenager walking his dog stopped to watch the showdown and whispered that this was better than television. The woman threatened to report the lights to the HOA. The man folded his arms and refused. The teenager clapped when the woman marched away in defeat. 2. A man marched up to his neighbor and complained that the giant inflatable Santa on the roof was sending a disrespectful vibe toward his house. He said Santa tilted his head in a mocking way and he wanted it removed before sunset. The neighbor laughed and said Santa never moved at all. The man got more frustrated and climbed on a trash bin to demonstrate the tilt he claimed to see. An older woman raking leaves watched the entire moment with complete disbelief. She said Santa looked tired, not disrespectful. The man insisted he felt judged every time he looked outside. The neighbor refused to take it down. The woman shook her head and walked off laughing. 3. A woman ran outside and accused her neighbor of using Christmas bells that rang in a suspicious way. She said the soft jingling sounded like coded messages, and she demanded he switch to silent decorations. The neighbor stared in total confusion and lifted one bell to prove it was normal. She said the gesture confirmed her theory. A delivery driver walking up the street slowed down to watch the argument. He whispered that he had delivered packages for 10 years and never heard anything so dramatic. The woman kept pacing like she was uncovering a mystery. The neighbor refused to change anything. The driver shook his head and said he needed hazard pay for this street. 4. A man banged on his neighbor's door and complained that the flashing candy cane lights were hypnotizing his cat. He said the cat stared at the window for 3 hours and refused to blink. The neighbor said cats stare at anything, and the lights were not magic. The man held his cat like evidence and pointed its face at the lights. A teenage girl riding a scooter stopped and watched him wave the cat around like a judge in a pet show. She covered her mouth to keep from laughing. The cat jumped from his arms and ran home. The man blamed the lights again. The neighbor shrugged and said the cat looked smarter than both of them. 5. A woman marched to her neighbor's driveway and said his nativity sheep looked too realistic and it scared her toddler. She said the sheep eyes followed her every time she walked past the yard. The neighbor said they were plastic and did not even move. She demanded he rotate them so the sheep faced the fence instead. A jogger passing by slowed down and inspected the sheep like he expected them to breathe. He shook his head and said they looked harmless. The woman insisted the sheep were plotting something. The neighbor refused to turn anything. The jogger laughed as she stomped away while the plastic sheep stared at nothing. 6. A man rushed to his neighbor's lawn and yelled that the giant Christmas penguin Inflatable was mocking his walk. He said every time he stepped outside, the penguin leaned slightly to the left and that felt personal. The neighbor said it leaned because of the wind. The man demonstrated his walk and yelled every time the penguin swayed. A mail carrier approaching the houses stopped and watched the dramatic marching. She nearly dropped her mail from laughing. The man accused the penguin of attitude. The neighbor refused to deflate it. The mail carrier said she wished every street had entertainment like this one. 7. A woman knocked on her neighbor's door and complained that his snowman looked too cheerful during stressful times. She said the smile made her feel judged whenever she left for work. The neighbor said it was simply a happy decoration. She said happy decorations were rude when other people were struggling. A man shoveling snow across the street leaned on his shovel and watched the debate like it was a holiday play. He said the snowman looked sleepy, not cheerful. The woman demanded the smile be toned down. The neighbor told her to talk to the manufacturer. The man shoveling snow laughed so hard he dropped his shovel. 8. A man confronted his neighbor and said her Christmas wreath smelled too festive and was distracting him while he tried to meditate. He said the pine scent drifted across the yard and invaded his inner peace. The neighbor said it was a normal wreath with normal smell. He insisted his meditation app warned him about environmental disturbances. A woman walking her dog paused and sniffed the air like a judge testing perfume. She said she could barely smell anything. The man accused her of having weak senses. The neighbor refused to remove the wreath. The woman with the dog said she needed popcorn for this neighborhood. 9. A woman shouted over the fence and told her neighbor that his tiny Christmas train was a safety hazard. She said the little train circling the yard could confuse her toddler into thinking real trains were safe. The neighbor reminded her that real trains did not fit in suburban yards. She said toddlers did not understand size differences. A delivery biker slowed his bike and watched the tiny train run in circles. He said it looked adorable, not dangerous. The woman demanded the neighbor retire the train. The neighbor refused and turned the speed up slightly. The biker laughed as the woman claimed this was hostile behavior. 10. A man stormed to his neighbor's porch and said the candy cane archway created emotional pressure. He said walking under it felt like entering a judgment tunnel. The neighbor asked him how a decoration could judge anyone. He said the arch shape made him feel guilty about holiday shopping. A woman pushing a stroller stopped to watch him mimic walking under the arch in slow motion, like he was entering a sacred zone. She laughed so hard she had to steady herself. The neighbor told him the archway was staying. He announced he would avoid that sidewalk forever. The woman said that was the best decision he made all year. 11. A woman marched to her neighbor's driveway and said his inflatable elf looked too smug, and that smug decorations were not welcome on their street. She said the elf had a grin that bothered her spirit every morning. The neighbor said it was a regular factory grin. She refused to believe that and kept circling the elf like she was inspecting a crime scene. A teenager hanging Christmas lights across the street stopped to watch her dramatic pacing. He shook his head and said the elf looked confused, not smug. The woman demanded the neighbor adjust the face somehow. The neighbor laughed and walked inside. The teen nearly fell off his ladder from laughing. 12. A man knocked on his neighbor's door and accused her Christmas star of being too powerful. He said the star shined into his living room and made his television look weak. The neighbor said it was a $4 store decoration. He said $4 could still cause chaos. A jogger passing by slowed down and stared at the star. He said it looked normal and not even bright. The man insisted it was bright only when he was home. The neighbor refused to remove it. The jogger said he wished his biggest problem was a star that made his television faint. 13. A woman confronted her neighbor and said his driveway snowman was positioned in a disrespectful stance. She said the snowman leaned slightly and the lean felt targeted. The neighbor said the lean came from the sun melting one side. She accused him of making excuses. A mail carrier stepped onto the sidewalk and watched the argument while holding a stack of holiday letters. She examined the snowman and said it looked tired, not disrespectful. The woman demanded the snowman be rebuilt. The neighbor said he liked it the way it was. The mail carrier left while covering her smile. 14. A man stood in front of his neighbor's lawn and complained that the spinning Christmas tree topper sent him into a dizzy spell every time he opened his blinds. He said the spinning motion attacked his balance. The neighbor said he could simply close his blinds if it bothered him. He said closing blinds made his house feel sad. An older man walking his dog paused and squinted at the topper. He said it spun slower than a lazy fan. The complainer insisted he had sensitive senses. The neighbor refused to remove the topper. The dog walker laughed and said sensitive senses sounded exhausting. 15. A woman yelled across her yard and said her neighbor's gingerbread house display was too realistic. She said the frosting lines made her crave sweets, and she blamed the display for ruining her diet. The neighbor said it was made from plastic and not edible. She said plastic could still sabotage self-control. A boy riding his bike stopped and stared at the display. He said it looked cute, not dangerous. The woman insisted it was a threat to her goals. The neighbor refused to remove anything. The boy pedaled away laughing at the idea of plastic frosting causing trouble. 16. A man stormed up to his neighbor's porch and accused him of using Christmas lights that blinked in a sneaky pattern. He said the pattern looked like a hidden signal. The neighbor said it was the slow blink setting on the control box. The man said sneaky blinking was unacceptable. A woman scraping ice from her windshield looked over and watched the interaction with disbelief. She said the lights looked peaceful, not suspicious. The complainer kept pointing at the bulbs like they were alive. The neighbor refused to change any setting. The woman laughed and said this street needed a reality show. 17. A woman knocked on her neighbor's door and complained that his holiday doormat played music too cheerfully. She said the tune startled her every time she visited. The neighbor said she could simply avoid stepping on it. She said avoiding it felt rude. A delivery driver carrying packages set down a box and watched the argument unfold. He stepped on the mat and listened to the gentle jingle. He said it sounded soft and harmless. The woman insisted the tune carried emotional pressure. The neighbor refused to replace it. The driver shook his head and said he had heard scarier microwaves. 18. A man stood in his neighbor's yard and said the inflatable polar bear was practicing intimidation. He said the bear lifted slightly when the wind blew, and that motion felt aggressive. The neighbor said the wind lifted everything. The man said the bear lifted with purpose. A teenager walking home from school stopped and stared at the bear for a long moment. He said the bear looked bored. The man accused him of not understanding danger. The neighbor refused to take down the inflatable. The teen walked away, saying the bear looked more chill than everyone else on the block. 19. A woman walked up to her neighbor's garage and complained that his red and green light projector turned her white car into a festive clown. She said the colors ruined her vehicle dignity. The neighbor said it was only light and would not hurt anything. She said dignity mattered. A man jogging with headphones paused and watched her gesture around the car as if it needed therapy. He said the colors looked fun. She said fun was not the goal. The neighbor refused to adjust the projector. The jogger left laughing at the idea of a car with dignity issues. 20. A man pointed at his neighbor's rooftop penguin and said the bird was encouraging bad behavior. He said the penguin tilted forward like it wanted to jump, and he feared kids would copy it. The neighbor said kids could not reach rooftops. The man said kids copied everything. A woman walking her dog stopped and looked up at the penguin. She said it looked sleepy, not reckless. The man kept pacing under the roof like he was guarding a cliff. The neighbor refused to remove the penguin. The woman said she needed to walk faster before she laughed too hard. 21. A woman stomped across her snowy yard and told her neighbor that his Christmas mailbox cover looked too romantic. She said the mistletoe pattern created unrealistic expectations in her household. The neighbor said it was just a cheap cover he bought online. She said cheap items could still trigger emotional chaos. A teenage boy walking past stopped and stared at the mailbox for a long moment. He said the design looked sleepy, not romantic. The woman said the mailbox encouraged unwanted affection. The neighbor refused to remove it. The teen walked away, shaking his head at the idea of mistletoe causing a crisis. 22. A man pounded on his neighbor's door and said the small Christmas train under the porch made his dog jealous. He said the constant motion bothered the dog and ruined the peace he needed. The neighbor said the train was tiny and harmless. The man held his barking dog like proof of injustice. A woman walking her toddler paused and watched the dog bark at the toy train. She laughed and said the dog seemed more dramatic than the train. The man said emotional animals needed respect. The neighbor said the dog needed rest. The woman pushed her stroller away before bursting into laughter. 23. A woman confronted her neighbor and said his nutcracker statue stared at her windows with hostile energy. She said the painted eyes followed her movements. The neighbor said the eyes were printed and could not follow anyone. She refused to believe that and circled the nutcracker like a detective. A man jogging with holiday lights wrapped around his vest slowed down to observe. He said the nutcracker looked confused, not hostile. The woman demanded the statue be turned around. The neighbor refused. The jogger told her the nutcracker looked tired of the drama. 24. A man shouted from his driveway and said his neighbor's rooftop sleigh caused emotional panic every night. He said the shape of the sleigh made him think it would fall on his house. The neighbor said it was secured with strong straps. He said straps did not guarantee survival. A teen delivering gift baskets stopped and stared at the sleigh. He said it barely moved. The man insisted it wobbled in threatening ways. The neighbor refused to take it down. The teen walked away saying he had seen wilder furniture in dorm rooms. 25. A woman marched toward her neighbor yard and said the candy cane fence was creating too much joy. She said the bright colors made her feel forced into a cheerful mood. The neighbor said joy was the whole point of the season. She said forced joy was dangerous. A man cleaning snow off his truck paused and examined the fence. He said it looked cute, not dangerous. The woman said cute things could still be overwhelming. The neighbor refused to remove any candy canes. The man wiped his truck and laughed until he dropped the brush. 26. A man approached his neighbor and said the blinking reindeer caused him to lose focus during morning meditation. He said the gentle blinking felt like a cosmic distraction. The neighbor said it was the lowest brightness setting. He said low levels of distraction still damaged his intention. A woman jogging by slowed down and stared at the reindeer. She said the blinking looked peaceful. The man insisted the lights challenged his inner balance. The neighbor refused to change anything. The jogger ran off laughing at the idea of reindeer disturbing enlightenment. 27. A woman accused her neighbor of creating psychological warfare with a rotating Christmas angel. She said the angel turned too slowly and that slow rotations caused inner discomfort. The neighbor said he bought it that way and never adjusted anything. She pointed at the angel like it was plotting. A teenage boy carrying a bag of groceries watched the scene unfold. He said the angel looked bored, not dangerous. The woman said boredom could still damage peace. The neighbor refused to unplug it. The teenager walked home shaking his head at her theory. 28. A man told his neighbor that her sparkly snowflake decorations sent aggressive reflections into his living room. He said the flashes created panic in his pet turtle. The neighbor said the turtle probably did not care about reflections. He said turtles had deep feelings. A delivery woman with a stack of packages paused and looked at the reflections. She said they looked gentle. The man insisted the sparkles attacked the soul. The neighbor refused to remove the decorations. The delivery woman walked away smiling at the turtle drama. 29. A woman stormed toward her neighbor's porch and said the jingle sound from his wreath made her feel like she was being followed. She said every breeze created alarms in her mind. The neighbor said the bells made a soft sound. She said soft sounds could still cause distress. A man walking his dog stopped and listened. He said he could barely hear anything. The woman insisted the wreath plotted against her peace. The neighbor refused to replace it. The man continued his walk laughing at her seriousness. 30. A man confronted his neighbor and said her snowman family display created unfair pressure on his lifestyle. He said the 3 snow figures made him feel judged for living alone. The neighbor said they were just decorations. He said decoration choices carried emotional messages. A college student delivering flyers paused and studied the snowman family. She said they looked like sleepy lumps of snow. The man said sleepy lumps could still shame him. The neighbor refused to change anything. The student left shaking her head at the idea of snow figures causing guilt. 31. A woman stomped across her yard and told her neighbor that his Christmas countdown sign caused extreme stress. She said watching the numbers change made her feel like she was failing the season. The neighbor said it was just a simple countdown. She said simple things could still destroy peace. A retiree walking his dog stopped and checked the sign like it carried a secret. He said the numbers looked calm. The woman insisted the sign rushed her soul. The neighbor refused to take it down. The retiree chuckled and said he wished he had worries that small. 32. A man approached his neighbor and said the gingerbread soldier by the driveway looked too confident. He said the pose created an atmosphere of superiority that bothered him every morning. The neighbor said it was shaped by a factory and nothing personal. The man circled it like he expected it to salute. A teenage girl walking home watched the scene with wide eyes. She said the soldier looked sleepy, not confident. The man said, sleepy things could still intimidate. The neighbor refused to move it. The girl walked away giggling at the drama over a stiff gingerbread figure. 33. A woman yelled at her neighbor and said his mailbox lights blinked in an untrustworthy way. She said the blinking made her nervous about her holiday mail. The neighbor said the lights were standard and harmless. She said harmless things could still send signals. A man carrying grocery bags stopped and looked at the mailbox. He said the lights blinked like any normal decoration. The woman insisted they blinked with intention. The neighbor refused to turn them off. The man walked away laughing at her intense mailbox theory. 34. A man rushed to his neighbor's porch and said the Santa figure on the swing looked too realistic. He said the gentle motion made him feel watched. The neighbor said the wind moved the swing. He said the wind did not explain the vibe. A teenage boy raking leaves paused and stared at Santa. He said the figure looked tired, not alive. The man insisted the swing created emotional pressure. The neighbor refused to remove it. The boy whispered that this block needed a therapist. 35. A woman confronted her neighbor and said his rooftop Christmas tree caused her to have deep competitive stress. She said the height made her decorations feel small. The neighbor said height did not matter. She said height always mattered during the holidays. A jogger with a headband full of lights stopped and studied the tree. He said it looked normal. The woman insisted every branch mocked her. The neighbor refused to change anything. The jogger ran away, trying not to laugh at the idea of tree height creating pressure. 36. A man accused his neighbor of creating chaos with a Santa that waved too slowly. He said slow waving felt unsettling. The neighbor said the motor moved at one speed. The man said the speed was sinister. A woman walking her dog slowed down and examined the waving Santa. She said it looked friendly. The man insisted friendly things could still unsettle him. The neighbor refused to unplug it. The woman laughed as her dog sniffed Santa without concern. 37. A woman shouted at her neighbor that his driveway arch of lights created a feeling of intimidation. She said walking under it felt like a test. The neighbor said she did not need to walk under it. She said avoiding it felt like surrender. A delivery driver set down a package and watched her pace under the arch, like she was entering a ceremony. The driver said the lights looked peaceful. The woman insisted the arch judged her vibe. The neighbor refused to remove it. The driver left laughing at her dramatic walk. 38. A man said his neighbor Christmas bear looked too ambitious. He said the upright pose suggested the bear wanted neighborhood leadership. The neighbor said it was stuffed plastic. The man said plastic could still carry ambition. A boy walking home stopped and stared at the bear. He said the bear looked confused, not ambitious. The man said confusion was a tactic. The neighbor refused to move the bear. The boy walked away, trying not to laugh at the bear leadership debate. 39. A woman went to her neighbor and said his stocking display felt aggressive. She said the large sizes made her small stockings look sad. The neighbor said size did not matter in decorations. She said size always mattered at Christmas. A man cleaning ice from his windshield stopped to inspect the stockings. He said they looked festive, not aggressive. The woman insisted they affected her confidence. The neighbor refused to shrink anything. The man laughed as she walked home in frustration. 40. A man accused his neighbor of causing emotional turbulence with a glowing snowflake sign. He said the pulsing light created inner storms. The neighbor said the light pulsed softly. He said soft pulses could still disturb minds. A woman carrying shopping bags paused and studied the snowflake. She said it looked gentle. The man said gentleness was deceptive. The neighbor refused to change the setting. The woman continued walking with a confused smile at the thought of a snowflake causing turbulence. 41. A woman stormed across her yard and told her neighbor that his glowing Christmas gnome looked too sneaky. She said the little figure hiding under the tree made her feel watched when she took out her trash. The neighbor said it was just a decoration with a weak bulb. She said weak bulbs could still hide intentions. An old man walking his dachshund stopped and stared at the gnome. He said it looked tired, not sneaky. The woman insisted the gnome judged her every night. The neighbor refused to move it. The old man shook his head and said this neighborhood needed a hobby. 42. A man marched to his neighbor's porch and said the rooftop Santa hat was pointing at his house in a threatening way. He said the tilt of the hat created negative energy on his property. The neighbor said the wind tilted it. The man said the wind would not choose him on purpose. A teen riding a scooter slowed down and looked up at the hat. He said it looked floppy, not threatening. The man insisted floppy things could still create bad vibes. The neighbor refused to adjust it. The teen rolled away laughing at the seriousness of a hat. 43. An old woman knocked on her neighbor's door and said his snowflake projector made her lawn look like a dance floor. She said the moving lights encouraged chaos and she valued order. The neighbor said it was holiday decoration, not a party invite. She said her grass deserved dignity. A jogger wearing a Santa beanie stopped to observe the lights move gently. He said they looked peaceful. The old woman said peace could still be misleading. The neighbor refused to turn off the projector. The jogger continued his run while shaking his head at her concern for grass dignity. 44. A man confronted his neighbor and said her inflatable snowman was staring directly into his kitchen. He said the round eyes felt too focused. The neighbor said snowmen always stared at everything. He said that was the problem. An old woman pulling her trash bin paused and examined the snowman. She said it looked blank, not focused. The man insisted blank faces were the scariest. The neighbor refused to turn it around. The old woman pushed her bin away, laughing under her breath. 45. A teen girl complained to her neighbor that his Christmas penguin held its candy cane in an arrogant way. She said the pose felt disrespectful to the community. The neighbor said the penguin came out of the box that way. She said some poses were dangerous. An old man sweeping leaves stopped to judge the penguin. He said it looked clumsy, not arrogant. The teen insisted clumsy things could still insult her mood. The neighbor refused to reposition it. The old man chuckled as he swept around her tantrum. 46. An old man banged on his neighbor's door and said her driveway nativity was too dramatic. He said the lantern glow made his yard feel underdecorated. The neighbor said he could add decorations if he wanted balance. He said balance should not require extra work. A woman walking a golden retriever stopped and looked at the nativity. She said it looked gentle, not dramatic. The old man said gentle light could still create pressure. The neighbor refused to dim anything. The woman walked off laughing at how stressed he looked over glowing lanterns. 47. A woman shouted at her neighbor that his holiday wreath spun with suspicious rhythm when the wind blew. She said the motion felt like a secret signal. The neighbor said the wind did not send messages. She said wind could still participate in mischief. A man jogging by paused and examined the spinning wreath. He said it looked slow and harmless. The woman insisted slow movement was the most dangerous. The neighbor refused to remove it. The jogger continued down the street while laughing to himself. 48. A man rushed into his neighbor's yard and said the Christmas deer family looked like they were judging him. He said the position of their heads made him uncomfortable every time he parked his car. The neighbor said they were molded plastic. He said molded plastic could still mock him. A teen delivering newspapers stopped and inspected the deer. He said they looked confused, not judging. The man insisted confusion was worse. The neighbor refused to move them. The teen shook his head and walked off laughing. 49. An old woman complained to her neighbor that his light-up peppermint walkway blinded her cat. She said the reflections confused the animal spirit. The neighbor said the lights were dim. She said dim lights could still damage inner balance. A man unloading groceries stopped and stared at the walkway. He said it looked pretty. The old woman insisted pretty things were distractions. The neighbor refused to change anything. The man walked away smiling at the idea of a cat losing balance over candy lights. 50. A woman confronted her neighbor and said his holiday inflatable dragon was not Christmas-themed, and therefore created seasonal tension. She said the dragon wings made her nativity scene feel disrespected. The neighbor said dragons could celebrate too. She said that idea ruined tradition. A teen walking with headphones stopped and admired the dragon. He said it looked awesome. The woman said awesome things caused conflict. The neighbor refused to deflate it. The teen walked away laughing at her fear of a plastic dragon. 51. An old man yelled across his yard and told his neighbor that her glowing Christmas angel looked too proud. He said the raised arms made him feel judged for his choices. The neighbor said the pose was part of the design. He said designs could still insult people. A teen boy walking his dog paused and stared at the angel. He said it looked sleepy, not proud. The old man insisted sleepy angels were the worst kind. The neighbor refused to tilt it. The teen laughed as he walked away and said, "This neighborhood needed a winter vacation." 52. A woman knocked on her neighbor's door and said his blinking reindeer formed a pattern that distracted her yoga routine. She said the repeated flashes broke her inner balance. The neighbor said she could close her curtains. She said curtains trapped energy. A delivery driver placing packages down stopped to watch her, wave her arms like she was proving spiritual science. He said the lights looked calm. The woman insisted calm lights caused betrayal. The neighbor refused to turn them off. The driver walked away laughing and said he needed a bonus for dealing with this street. 53. A man confronted his neighbor and said her snow globe decoration caused emotional turbulence in his home. He said the swirling glitter made his living room feel unstable. The neighbor said children loved the snow globe. He said children had stronger minds. An old woman shuffling past stopped and leaned close to the globe. She said it looked peaceful and pretty. The man insisted peaceful glitter was dangerous. The neighbor refused to unplug it. The old woman shook her head and said she needed hot chocolate after witnessing this level of stress. 54. An old woman accused her neighbor of causing chaos with an inflatable elf that leaned forward slightly. She said the lean made her feel threatened every time she took out recycling. The neighbor said the wind pushed it. She said the wind was not the problem. A teenage boy walking home stopped and tapped the elf gently. It wobbled with no danger at all. He said it looked harmless. The old woman insisted harmless things were tricky. The neighbor refused to adjust it. The teen walked off laughing at her fear of wobbling plastic. 55. A man ran to his neighbor's driveway and said the musical candy canes created emotional pressure on his morning routine. He said the melody made him feel forced to hurry. The neighbor said it was a soft loop. He said loops were the worst. A woman jogging with her dog paused and listened. She said the song sounded gentle. The man said gentle songs pushed expectations. The neighbor refused to shut them off. The jogger continued on while shaking her head at the drama over soft music. 56. A woman stormed up to her neighbor's porch and said the giant Santa archway made her feel like she had to greet everyone. She said walking under it felt like a responsibility. The neighbor said it was only decoration. She said decorations could dictate behavior. A man unloading firewood paused and inspected the arch. He said it looked friendly, not demanding. The woman insisted friendly things were the most dangerous. The neighbor refused to remove it. The man walked away, laughing at the idea of Santa forcing greetings. And after seeing all of this holiday chaos, it is now official. No neighborhood in America survives December without at least one person losing their mind over completely normal decorations. Some complain about lights. Some complain about music. Some complain about plastic snowmen staring too hard. So if your street feels dramatic, just know you are not alone. People are out here fighting Christmas trees like they are boss battles. If you made it this far, smash the like button if your neighborhood is at least 10% unhinged during Christmas. Now tell me in the comments, what is the craziest holiday complaint you have ever seen in real life? The wildest story gets pinned tomorrow.